The room had been designed to make people behave. High ceilings, soft light, tables spaced just far enough apart to discourage candor. I'd learned long ago that places like this rewarded silence more than honesty, so I stayed quiet. I always did. My wife stood beside me, her hand resting lightly at my elbow. She has a way of being present without taking space, a calm that doesn't ask permission. I noticed, not for the first time, how differently the room responded to her than to me. People smiled at her with recognition, then looked at me as if I were an attachment they hadn't ordered. It wasn't new. I'd been underestimated most of my adult life. Not aggressively, just gently, like someone setting a glass too close to the edge of a table without noticing. You learn to keep track of these things without reacting to them. The evening moved along in fragments, half-heard conversations, names exchanged and immediately forgotten, a few polite laughs that landed nowhere. I watched the patterns form, the way attention pooled around certain people and drained from others. I wasn't offended. I was alert. He appeared halfway through the night, confident, loose in his movements, familiar with the room in a way that suggested repetition. When he spoke, people leaned in. When he laughed, it gave them permission to do the same. I clocked him quickly, then let him drift back into the background of my awareness. Until he didn't, I was turned slightly away, listening to someone explain something they clearly believed I didn't understand. When the room shifted. It's hard to describe how you know something has happened before you see it. A tightening in the air. A pause that doesn't belong. I turned. His hand was on my wife's wrist. Not forceful. Not violent. Worse than that, casual, familiar, as if access had already been granted and this was merely confirmation. She hadn't pulled away yet. Not frozen exactly, but assessing. She met my eyes, and in that glance was a question we'd never had to ask before. I felt no surge of anger. What I felt was precision. There are moments when noise is expected of you, when escalation feels scripted. This was one of those moments. I could sense it in the way people nearby leaned back slightly, already preparing to witness something. I didn't give them that. I stepped forward just enough to be unavoidable. Not between them. Beside my wife, close enough that my presence altered the geometry of the interaction. "Let go," I said. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't explain. The words were flat, almost administrative. He laughed lightly. "Relax, I was just—" "Let go," I repeated. The second time landed differently. It wasn't louder. It was narrower, directed. He released her hand, still smiling, but now the smile had lost its edges. Around us, conversation stalled. It was subtle, but unmistakable. The room had gone quiet in that way that isn't silence yet. Just waiting. He looked at me, finally. Really looked. I could see him recalibrating, trying to decide whether I was someone he could afford to dismiss. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," he said, turning his body slightly toward the nearest group, searching for allies. "There hasn't," I replied. That was all. No accusation, no elaboration, just a refusal to reframe what had already been seen. For a moment, nothing happened. And then it did. The host approached. Not hurried, not dramatic. His presence alone shifted the balance. He placed a hand on the man's shoulder, not roughly, not gently. "With authority." "We need to have a word," the host said. The man opened his mouth, closed it, then nodded. They moved away together, not escorted, removed. The room exhaled in fragments. Conversations restarted unevenly. Someone laughed too loud, then stopped. A few people avoided looking at us. Others glanced over with something like respect, though it carried no warmth. My wife squeezed my arm. Not in thanks, in grounding. We didn't leave immediately. There was no rush. Staying felt important, though I couldn't have said why at the time. Perhaps because leaving would have suggested retreat, and retreat hadn't happened. Later, when the evening thinned and the exits filled, someone approached me, a woman I'd spoken to briefly earlier. She didn't comment on what had happened. She simply said, "I'm glad you were here tonight." So was I. On the drive home, the city slid past in quiet bands of light. My wife rested her head against the window. "You okay?" I asked. She nodded. "I am." That was enough. I didn't replay the moment the way people imagine you do. There was no swelling satisfaction. No fantasy of having won something. What stayed with me was the stillness afterward. The fact that dignity, once asserted, didn't need reinforcement. I slept well that night. Not because something had been resolved, but because something had been clarified.